Scholars of United States history, welcome to video notes for Unit 5. Let's start with Chapter 14, which is about imperialism. Now, imperialism is all about money. It's about a big mother country looking to spread its influence all over the world, to access new markets and raw materials to make money. And if you have this happening all over the globe, then this increase in trade during the late 1800s is the era of the first global economy. All sorts of countries were doing this, and the United States decides to get into the imperial game themselves. The United States starts doing lots of business with Asia, and as you can see on this map, that's a heck of a long journey across the Pacific Ocean. And as you know, anytime you've been in a car for a very long period of time, you've got to stop and get gas. And would you look at that? The Hawaiian Islands are almost the perfect halfway point. But there's just one problem. Queen Liliuokalani, of course, is the monarch of Hawaii. But in 1883, the United States helps depose, that means get rid of Queen Liliuokalani, and controls the Hawaiian Islands. Because that position is a strategic refueling location for all these American ships doing business with Asia. So Queen Liliuokalani is gone, and the United States will annex, mean bring Hawaii as part of the United States as a result. There's something else going on. There's issues with Spain. Spain controls Cuba as its own colony. In Cuba, there's an independence movement, kind of like our 1776, and Spain doesn't want it to happen. Spain attempts to put down the rebellion, and America doesn't support Old World Spain, supports New World Cuba. You can think Monroe Doctrine, America for the Americas. What was helping that was yellow journalists who were writing all sorts of super dramatic and very often exaggerated stories about what was happening in Cuba. But it drummed up enough attention, enough outrage, that the United States sent the USS Maine into Havana Harbor, to keep an eye on things, to be a military threat, but to make sure things don't get too crazy. And whoa, baby! The USS Maine sunk into Havana Harbor. Of course, it must have gotten hit by a Spanish mine or a torpedo or something crazy that the Spanish would have done. Well, historians now believe that it was an internal explosion that sunk the Maine, but that's not the point. The point is Americans said, remember the Maine! To heck with Spain. And the U.S. found itself in the Spanish-American War. Now, to all military historians out there, I apologize for what's about to happen. The United States wins. Now that the United States has won the Spanish-American War, we get the Treaty of Paris in 1898. The United States annexed Puerto Rico, small island very close to Cuba, and the Philippines. Which makes you wonder, if this was all about helping out Cuba, why would we want the Philippines? Ha ha ha, that's a little imperialism. But the United States does not annex Cuba. Instead, the United States asserts the right to intervene in Cuban affairs. If we think something's going bad in Cuba, we can send our military in anytime we want. If we want a military base, Guantanamo Bay, we can do that anytime we want. It was called the Platt Amendment, but the point is the United States asserts the right to intervene in Cuba, but will annex Puerto Rico and the Philippines. Hey, look, here's Cuba, assert right to intervene. There's Puerto Rico, annex. This is the Panama Canal. We'll get to that in a second. This is the Philippines. That would be an annex too. All right, so those are our annexes. Look right up here to China. What was happening in China is all sorts of different European countries were having what they called spheres of influence. They were doing business, economic trading posts, if you will. But it was a recipe for disaster. There was so much competition in China. Secretary of State John Hay, like what horses eat, proposed the open door policy, which said, all nations have equal trading rights in China, and you must obey Chinese law. All foreigners in China got to obey Chinese law. All these countries agreed to it, and the open door policy was a success. The youngest president ever was Theodore Roosevelt. At 42 years old, he came to power after the assassination of William McKinley, and he had a dramatic plan for Latin America. One of his big goals right here was to build this thing, the Panama Canal. President Roosevelt, the United States, encouraged Panama's independence from Colombia because Panama was like a state in Colombia. But Panama, with the encouragement of the United States, declared independence. Of course, the United States supported Panama, not Colombia. And once they were independent, the first thing that the U.S. did was negotiate a treaty, which says two things. Number one, we're friends. Give me five. Number two, let's build that canal. So the Panama Canal, Theodore Roosevelt, treaty with Panama, Panama free, independent, done with Colombia. Once Roosevelt goes away, another president takes over, or the next president was William Howard Taft. He had a different plan in Latin America, and by Latin America, I mean right here in Central America and all of South America. He says, do not drop bombs, drop dollars. Dollar diplomacy says, one, American banks and businesses invest in Latin America. But two, if things get out of hand, if there's unrest, if there's violence, Taft promised, I will send in the military. I will make sure that your investments are safe. Dollar diplomacy, William Howard Taft, kind of sounds like Laffy Taffy, Taffy. How much does Laffy Taffy cost? You know, like the big one you get at 7-Eleven. $1. That kind of reminds me of dollar diplomacy. Laffy spelled L-A, Latin America. Premium or non-premium? Premium. Chapter 15, the Progressive Movement. The Progressive Movement attempts to fix bad stuff. Let's talk about the bad stuff. There's two causes of the Progressive Movement. Number one was what was called the excesses of the Gilded Age. Gilded means covered in gold, but still bad stuff going on. Remember our industrialization, our big four, are super rich, but there still was super poor. So here's our first point for the income, for the Gilded Age excesses. One, income disparity. You had very, very rich, and you had very, very poor. And the super rich often lived in lavish lifestyles, meaning they ate the finest this, lived in the biggest houses, all while there was still a lot of poverty in the United States. Two, the practices of the robber barons. Robber barons is a negative name given to Carnegie, Rockefeller, Morgan, and Vanderbilt, along with many other leading industrialists, saying that they were paying too low wages, exploiting their influence by bribing the government, all those bad stuff. Two, the other big cause besides the Gilded Age excesses was working conditions for labor. Dangerous working conditions, child labor, employment of women, company towns, hours, wages, no security, no benefits. We call that bad stuff. So the Progressive Movement looks to fix it. Here we go. Americans today and all the way back to 1776 argue over what the role of government is. The Progressive Movement states government is good. We use good government to fix bad stuff. And here's how we do it. One, government needs to be controlled by the people, not by these rich industrialists. Two, economic opportunity through government regulation. Remember, laissez-faire, hands off? Oh, no. Now, the government is going to keep its hands on people like Carnegie, Rockefeller. Watch to make sure that they're following all the rules and allow other people to have economic opportunity. And third, the elimination of social injustices. Real bad stuff that you say, gosh, in the United States, we shouldn't have that happening. The Progressive Movement is going to try to fix it. All right, let's start with government. Local governments, I'm talking about cities. The United States, there's a spread of the commissioner and city manager style. What that means is you can hire an expert to deal with things like sewage or traffic, and you can fire that person. Hard to do that with politicians. And this was designed to meet the needs of rapid urbanization. As we had big cities, we go to commissioners and city managers. At the state level, we have referendum, initiative, and recall. Let's look at referendum. Referendum is when citizens vote on laws proposed to them by politicians. So the politicians come up with the ideas for the laws, but the citizens actually vote on them. The citizens are the referees. They decide what's good and bad. That's referendum. Initiative is where citizens introduce legislation to the politicians. So think of anything that you would like to see changed in America. Well, you write it up, let's do this, this, and this, and then you give it to the politicians and say, now you guys vote on that. You take the initiative. And then recall. If a product gets recalled, it means people don't want it anymore. Recall would be used for politicians where a special election would get rid of a very unpopular politician who's failing in the eyes of the people. Primary elections. This is for your big political parties. Democrat, Republicans. You cannot just, they can't just decide, okay, this person's going to be the nominee. No, the people will vote on it in primaries. The 17th Amendment called for the direct election of senators. Before this, the state legislatures voted on the senators. So it's like this. I vote. The General Assembly in Virginia, used to be the House of Burgesses, they vote and pick the two people. 17th Amendment says, no way, baby. Get rid of that. Just have the people vote directly for their senators, and then the senators will be responsive to the people and not their cronies in the state legislatures, man. Secret elections, the secret ballot, was used in elections, and that's just what you think it is. Privacy when casting your vote. Before that, there wasn't much privacy. All right, muckrakers. Muckrakers were journalists or individuals who exposed corruption, exposed inequality, exposed bad stuff. And a big one was Upton Sinclair. In his book, The Jungle, he writes about the terrible conditions in Chicago meatpacking plants. As a result, two laws. One, the Meat Inspection Act, which sent federal inspectors to make sure that, these meatpacking plants actually are clean. The second one was the Pure Food and Drug Act, which gets rid of any falsely labeled food or drug and requires a prescription if you're going to purchase a drug. Child labor also benefits from the muckrakers. A book called The Bitter Cry of Children described the terrible child labor situations. Remember, laissez-faire. The government's not going to make any laws about child labor. Well, in the progressive era, there were laws. And because there were laws, you have less kids working and more kids going to the greatest place on earth, school. Square deal. Square deal was Teddy Roosevelt's progressive plan. He said everybody gets a square deal, meaning everyone should have a fair opportunity. His belief for monopolies, also at this time called trusts, was to regulate them, not break them up, regulate them. That was part of his square deal. That's why they call him Roosevelt Regulator. But another big plan, a big progressive agenda, was Woodrow Wilson's from Virginia. And when he was president, it wasn't the square deal. He called it New Freedom. And his goal was to destroy monopolies. All monopolies must be destroyed. So if it's Roosevelt Regulator with Wilson, wreck it, Wilson. All right, what are these laws anyway that allow them to destroy these trusts, to break up these monopolies? The first one in 1890 was the Sherman Antitrust Act, which said any business which restrains trade, aka monopoly, that's illegal. But it wasn't really worded great. It was not enforced great either. So in 1914, the Clayton Antitrust Act was passed, and it does three things. One, it expanded the Sherman Antitrust Act to cover more situations. Two, it outlawed price fixing. That's when a bunch of businesses decide, okay, we're all going to lower our rates to get some guy out of business, and then once he's gone, then we'll raise our rates again. You can't do that. Last one is it exempted unions. So unions could still be monopolies. Like, let's say all the teachers are in a union. That sounds like a monopoly, doesn't it? The Clayton Antitrust Act says, no, that's okay. That's okay. Clayton Antitrust Act. 16th Amendment was passed, which allows the federal government to tax income at a progressive rate, which here's what that means. The more you make, the more you pay. The less you make, the less you pay. And here's a progressive idea. The super rich, because you have so much money, should pay so much more by percentage. So it's not like everybody pays 10% of what they make. No, the highest tax bracket might pay something like 50%, and then you might have the poorest individuals in America paying no income tax. But it all goes to the 16th Amendment. Federal Reserve Act called for national supervision over the banking system. This will fail us later with the Great Depression, but for now we have federal inspection over the banking system, the Federal Reserve Act, and banks had to keep a reserve, hence the name, of their deposits in these banks. Last big one, 19th Amendment. This lady right here is Susan B. Anthony. Her strong leadership led to the passage of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. The protest movement was so dramatic, so successful, that it is the forerunner today for the modern protest movement. So 19th Amendment, huge progressive reform as well. How are you going to remember all these? 16, 17, 18, 19, if you can remember this one sentence, tax senators who don't drink with women, then you will remember tax. 16, income tax. Senators, 17, the direct election of senators. 18, don't drink. That's prohibition. And we'll get to that in a bit. And 19, with women, women's suffrage has been gained.